absent thee from felicity a while, and in this harsh world draw thy breath in pain to tell my story. These are the last words of Hamlet. He tells this to his friend Horatio, who is about to commit suicide. Now, the key there are the words felicity and to tell. How do you tell something in drama? To tell involves performance. How do you perform, therefore? How do you perform a story? Now, to answer this question, to address this question, we need to go back in time and trace the roots of theatre, of what makes for drama. Drama basically addresses, talks about human emotions. There are extremes, as it were, when we talk about human emotions. On one side, you have tragedy, sorrow, agony, and on the other side, you have mirth, happiness, laughter. These are the two ends, two extremes, as it were. And dramatic moments, I would say, oscillate between the tragic and the comic, or between the comic and the tragic. So, there are these two extremes. Emotions are not static. We know that it goes through, human emotions range, they travel through different contexts, situations, experiences. There could be an ebb and flow and ebb and flow, it can go on like that. It is a continuous kind of a process. But then when we try to present it, when we try to share it with somebody, we try to make it precise, we try to capture a certain moment. But then how does this happen? What are the roots of drama? What are the roots of, I am using the words drama and theatre perhaps interchangeably, but then this is only for the purpose of this presentation. The etymology of the word drama, the etymology of the word theatre, they are different. So, I am not going to talk about that, but then for my purpose, I am trying to go back and talk about the whole idea of performance and the idea of ritual. We always perform a ritual. Rituals are always performed. So, how do we perform rituals? What are the earliest, let us say, known records of rituals? These would be rituals where we appease nature, appease our surroundings, appease what we think are powers that be. We enact a whole lot of things. We go through those enactments, we participate in those enactments, and when we participate in enactments, a whole lot of emotions come, and we learn to inflect those emotions with words, with our tone, with our facial gestures. This is the earliest. And so, what happens is, like I said earlier, like I just pointed out, these are moments where you participate. There is a sense of community. You participate in something. And what is it that you participate in? You participate in moments of celebration. And it is for this reason that the Greeks would talk about the Dionysian tradition and the Apollonian tradition, the comic tradition and the tragic tradition. But then you have a lot more than the comic tradition and the tragic tradition, right. So, I am not going to again talk in detail about Greek tragedy or these traditions, but I think it is important to keep in mind that you have the Dionysian tradition and of course, the Apollonian tradition. But that again, like I said, that is not the be all and end all of drama. There is also something called the satire. So, tragedy is considered to be the supreme form of drama, of tragic drama, tragic theatre, but then tragic theatre will be complete only and only when it has its counterpart. That is called the fourth play, the satire play. So, what happens is you have the tragedies, you would have trilogies, rather 3 tragedies, and then you will have something called the fourth play. Now, the idea is this, see, that is what completes that whole human drama of existence. What happens in tragedies is that you will have a hero, a person with heroic qualities. We can read our Aristotle and then we will know what these human or tragic qualities are, who would be an ideal hero. You would have a hero with all these noble, fantastic qualities, but then there would be something there that brings about his downfall. That is what a tragedy is all about. But then you would have heroism throughout that is being played out. So, you have those 3 tragedies, and then you will have the fourth play. It is a satire play where the idea of the hero is turned completely upside down. It is a total reversal of that. It is another kind of experience that we have when we talk about the fourth play, because the whole idea of heroism, as I was talking about, that is turned upside down. See, this is what completes tragedy. This is what completes that experience of watching that whole range of emotions. This is what makes theatre very, very powerful. Now, how do we effect this? A lot depends on the way in which you compose these tragedies or these tetralogies. To our mind would immediately come those very famous Greek tragedians, Euripides, Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, the big names. There were many more tragedians, but then we do not have the texts of these tragedians. There were festivals where these theatres, these plays were being performed, and it was by watching all these plays over a period of time that Aristotle possibly came with his theory of poetry, theory of tragedy. Now, that is not the only way in which one could have thought or conceived of tragedy or of drama. Drama, what does drama mean? To do. To do. How do you do things? Now, with the Greeks you have the Romans following them, but with Rome the idea of theatre became slightly something else, because you did not have the tragedians like the Greeks. You had playwrights like Neander. The plays were different. There were comedies, but then they were all plays that were written to be read. This is the popular story that we have. But then when we talk about Roman theatre, I think what is most fascinating in terms of performance, it has to do with the Roman Colosseum. Roman theatre was based largely on the idea of the spectacular, of spectacle. I was talking about actions, to do, the performance dimension. Now, think about this. Think of or even consider Caesar sitting there, and all the senators and all the royal ladies sitting like this on this gallery, sitting there, and you have the doors all closed, locked. You would hear, as you hear now, the door opening, and comes in the warriors, the criminals, and they fight. There is a duel, gladiators, gladiator sport. So, there is a duel there. It is spectacle, it is theatre, because you never know what would happen, and what you witness there in that huge arena is the drama of life, because it is a matter of survival and death. Would you survive? Would you die? So, you have somebody vanquishing somebody else. It is a blood sport, and if you want to help this person, if you feel that this person must survive, you will give a thumbs up, and if you don't want this person to survive, you will give a thumbs down. So a lot depended on what the spectators were trying to say. It all depended on the spectator. It was spectator sport. Now look at that. This, I would say, is what really enables that community, that communion as it were, between the audience and the performer. And it is this that gives a whole lot of impetus to the evolution of theatre. This is globally, this is something that you find across the world, everywhere. There is this element of performance, the idea of the spectator, the spectacular. Now the question is, why is it, how is it that you have the spectacular? To address this question, to answer this question, we need to keep in mind that when we write something for production on stage, it must express. There must be a lot of expressivity. There would be expressivity when you have exaggeration. You write, you have a script, let us use the word script, you have a script, but then you bring it to life. How will you bring it to life? By making it expressive, by donning a mask, by painting yourself, by wearing costumes, and then taking voice from your gut, allowing the voice to come here, allow for voice modulation, have lights, have all the support that is possibly available there, right? So exaggeration, expressivity. These are two very key terms I think that we need to keep in mind when we talk about the realization of drama, realizing the full potential of the script for production. Now let me for a moment go back to Rome. We all know about Mark Antony. Mark Antony had a mistress, Volumnia. Volumnia, we are told, was very good at mime, pantomime. This is a word that we all know, mime. She was very good at mime, at mimicking. She would mimic and get away with it. She would cross dress perhaps, she would mimic, and she was an accomplished artist. So that would tell us a lot about a female presence, a kind of a gender sensitivity perhaps that certainly is there when we talk about productions of scripts, productions of, let's say, dramatization of all the inner urges that somebody would have to share. Now from there, if we, for example, consider, this is way back in time, if we come to even traditions, theatre traditions in India, it's possible to talk about the license that performers have had, the license that performers have had to, let us say, criticize society. You would have for example, in Kerala you have Kudiyattam. In Kudiyattam you have the Vidushaka. The Vidushaka had license to criticize even the king. He could look at somebody and talk, but then the person who's sitting there, the spectator, the audience, is not supposed to talk back. But it's a remarkable instance of a dialogue where you do not really respond with words, but then a conversation happens, a dialogue happens. That exchange is the biggest takeaway in theatre, and this is what is enabled by the script that you write, that a play writer, let us say, as Elizabethans would put it, there was no dramatist during Elizabethan times. The playwriter would have tried to pen down. Imagine this, the playwrights, the playwriters during the Elizabethan times, they would write, they would have read quite a lot, they had their education. Shakespeare did not have education, this is what we hear. They would write, and the script had to be registered, and then the script is distributed to people, to actors, to producers. They read it, they memorize it, they have their rehearsals, and they produce it in those theatres. There were ways in which the theatres evolved. That could be another session perhaps. But then what's very important is that way in which these plays were able to attract a whole lot of audience, a whole lot of people who realized that they could participate in the action, in the drama, that they could. How do you participate on the Shakespearean stage? They were trained in a way, and how did they get that training? This is where we can really talk about the popular social base of all performances. There were all kinds of people who would come and stand. I am sitting now. There are all these people who would stand, groundlings they were called. They would stand there and watch the action. People from different walks of life would come. People would have discovered, would have tried to create, if not discover, create free time. And they would come there. Why would they come there? Because they were curious. Performances create curiosity. How do you perform curiosity? How do you perform curiosity? This is what happens in theatre. This certainly did happen in Elizabethan theatre, because they were curious to know about the lives of kings. If you look at all those plays written during the Elizabethan period, most of them talked about the lives of kings and dukes and landscapes and regions which they could only imagine with the theatre space that was available, with the playwrights who wrote those plays. That perhaps was the most amazing thing that could have happened with the Elizabethan stage. So think about this. You think of the opening of a play like Hamlet. That is the the fort, and then you have two men who are watching, waiting, and there's a ghost that comes in. They see something. Hamlet comes. So it's an eerie kind of an atmosphere. So you capture the attention of the audience. There is a death and there is a ghost. Now, how do you relate to ghosts? It's possible to say that people in Elizabethan times, they were all very superstitious. So we are not superstitious, or we are superstitious. Every society for that matter is superstitious. Superstition is part of ritual. We need our superstitions just like we need our rituals. These are systems, these are transformed into stuff to imagine, to understand the reality around us, to understand what is happening. And that's exactly what you have in a play like Hamlet. So there is this curiosity of the audience that is aroused. Who killed this man, or how did this man die? Why is that there is a ghost there? It's a world of make-believe. Stories, when they are performed, stories when they are told, create this world of make-believe, take you to the world of make-believe. What does it mean to say that you create this world of make-believe? You make something so that you believe in it. Fiction, in that sense, the stories that you tell, in that sense, the stories are very, very real. And that's exactly what you get to watch, to see in Hamlet. So you have this ghost, see what it does. You would like to know what happened next. This what happened next is the stuff which has decided a whole lot of drama, a whole lot of narratives. And this is no different with any performance for that matter, any text, any script for that matter. We would like to know what happened next. It could be a novel, it could be a short story, it could be a play that you read. Why is it that you turn the page? Why is it that you are curious to know what will happen next? Because you would like to see that being enacted in front of you. And for that you need to become curious. Like I said earlier, what is going to happen next? Now, this is a remarkable idea that is taken up in very many different ways in theatre. I was talking about the Elizabethans. Now, you look at, for example, after that, if you look at British theatre, you look at the restoration drama, for instance, which would not have tragedies, but then they're all about comedies, comedy of manners, of fashionable society, of marriages and contracts and breach of contract, and illicit relationships, etc. there again, there is another kind of a curiosity that happens, that emerges, because you are opened, the audience is opened to the world of fashion, because there is a different history altogether. When you look at the structure of the stage, we started off with the Colosseum, we talked about, we imagine the kind of theatres that would have been there where people used masks in ancient Greece. But then here, the kind of transformation of the theatre space, the production space was fantastic, especially when you consider how the French influence was very much there in Britain, in the way in which the theatres were restored. So, this was happening everywhere, especially in Europe. So, you had a different kind of a theatre experience coming in. You were curious to know about fashion, you were curious to know about what happened to Millamant, for instance, very popular play, story of Mirabell and Millamant. I am not going into so many other, William Wycherley for example is another playwright. So, you have had this, that tradition goes on, it spreads different ways in which theatres would have evolved in different parts of the world. I am confining largely now to the west, though I made a very brief reference to the Vidushaga in the traditional theatre of Kerala, but then I am looking largely at Western theatre, especially British kind. This was this did get into the 20th century. It has had its own very interesting variations. A notable moment would be the plays of Oscar Wilde, very tongue-in-cheek kind of playwright, very tongue-in-cheek kind of plays, who had transformed the idea of manner and fashion in his plays. But then before we talk about Oscar Wilde, we need to really think about other let us say influences that really did come into the 20th century. That has to do with the Norwegian playwright Henrik Ibsen. Ibsen's social drama had a lot of impact, a lot of bearing on the plays of Bernard Shaw, who came after Oscar Wilde. The kind of questions that were asked in Shaw became very, very crucial, because from there the socialism that you find in Shaw is something that gets transformed, especially with the changing world order and the emergence of other playwrights who would probably revisit the earlier plays, like Shaw did with Caesar and Cleopatra, or with Edward Bond coming with his social plays like Lear, which is a rewriting of King Lear. Now, before we go into the plays of Edward Bond, before talking about this kind of a transformation and rewriting, I think along with that we need to really talk about a very, very important movement. It's not I am not giving you a chronological history, but then in our times, how do we relate to these plays, the ideas that they generated? How do you do an idea on stage? How do you make somebody think, especially when you write a script which is very, very slender? To my mind come the absurdist playwrights, and of course, it is very important today to talk about someone like Samuel Beckett, given the kind of times in which we find ourselves. Think of a play like Waiting for Godot. What happens in that play? We were talking about a whole lot of plays where a whole lot of things happen. People die, people give birth, there is agony, there is love, falling in love, falling out of love, there is spectacle, there is a world of dream, the world of mystery, there are all these things. But then when you come to a playwright like Beckett, when you come to a play like Waiting for Godot, what do you have? Nothing happens there. But then there is so much of drama in it. What is the drama there? There are two men who while away time waiting. What are they waiting for? They say that they are waiting for somebody. They don't know what the somebody is or who the somebody is. They are waiting for something to happen, like what we are doing today. We are waiting for the number of corona cases to come down. We are waiting for the pandemic to get over. We think that the pandemic will become perhaps an endemic and it will end. But we have been waiting for about 2 years now. The pandemic is there, we are there. And what has this taught us? The pandemic has taught us a lot about life and death, about fluctuations in life, like how light comes and goes, how there is a fading and a brightening of light. Life is all about that, and this is what theatre tries to communicate to us. What more can we have? Theatre, drama, all narratives for that matter have timelessly talked about how we live in the world and how we try to understand the meaning of life, the meaning of existence, and what death is. I started off by talking about Hamlet's last words, which was all about death. But then we don't know today what is in store for us given the coronavirus. What is this? We think that there is this virus. We know there is a virus. We all have we have had our vaccines. But there is always a but. And theatre hinges on that but what next? What will happen? Does anything happen? That's what Beckett asks. That is what Vladimir and Estragon in the play ask. What will happen? Does anything happen at all? And we are waiting, which is what we do when we enter the theatre. When we sit there to watch a play, we wait for the lights to go out and there'll be darkness, and then you will have the light coming in, and then the play begins. Now, I am not saying that everything that you watch on stage holds a mirror up to life, but then there is a way in which I think we are taught to recognize that it is possible to look at a mirror and recognize ourselves, recognize who we are, what we are doing to do drama. What is it that we are doing? I think this is perhaps what happens with drama. Unlike perhaps so many other genres, other experiences, story experiences that we have as human beings. Now, this perhaps these are times when we are reminded again and again of what is it that we are doing, how is it that we are doing it, how is it that we understand the spaces of our living, the distances that we have created, the distances that we share, the distances that we cross, and we are taught how to cross those distances, overcome those distances. And that is exactly where communication happens when we watch a play, right? I only hope that we all would get more opportunities to watch plays and then think of how playwrights express an idea and how we look at that idea and then learn to see what that idea is, so that we also start thinking about what we saw and how whatever we saw was expressed, and how we would perhaps learn to relate what was expressed before us, and perhaps take it with us and share it with our friends, or most primarily learn to share things with ourselves. Theatre in that sense is a remarkable genre where it's quite possible to learn how to introspect as an audience, because what it does is to create an audience who would have a heart to receive whatever is presented before you. How do you receive it? You receive it when you learn to give. You give yourself up in a certain way and then you receive it. So there is this dialogue, this two-way thing that happens. It can happen with all kinds of theatres. Theatres where you learn to question, theatres where you learn to emotionally relate to. Everywhere this happens. So with this idea of a give and take, a sharing, let me sign off. Thank you very much.